Our first speaker of the afternoon, quite simply, had the summer of his life. As the performance director of UK Athletics, this gentleman led the programme which brought this country such incredible success at London 2012. He is a man to whom Team GB owe a huge amount. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Professor Dave Collins.
Thank you very much. Actually, I'm sorry, I wish I could confess to being that. It was some Dutch guy. Yeah, I was the one who administered the cock-up in Beijing, but never mind, you know. Thank you, my dear, you've made an old man very happy. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, moving right along. I thought when I'm coming to talk to a bunch of performance analysts, I thought, how can I, just stir things up and make friends and influence people? And I thought, I'll look at some of the qualifications that might need to be considered before you start using performance analysis in the right way. So I'd like to start, because we've got some military guys in, by just looking at a military challenge. Now those of you who know me will know that there are some guys in this line whose motor ability is right where mine is. It's the Essex School of Disco Dancing, and there's nothing wrong with that. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is that when you're looking at this sort of thing, these guys would pass fitness tests, they'd pass body mass index tests, they'd pass skin fold, etc., in terms of their eligibility to perform. But clearly there's something... Right, but clearly... Sorry, best feature. But clearly there's something wrong going on here, and my point is that data's great, but there's some things at the minute, at least, that data can't analyse, and that gives us, therefore, some qualification. So what might be good and what might not be so good in terms of performance and improving performance? Okay, so if I'm now using performance analysis and information coming back to help people learn skills, which is a very, very common use of it, I'm interested as to how that information might be fitted best to what's going on. So I'm always interested, as an interdisciplinary sports scientist, into how the data that you've got can actually be used to best effect. In other words, is the feedback that's coming back from my analysts giving me information that fits their needs, their desired outcomes, their preferences, but also, of course, meets the agenda of the coaches and the performance directors who are employing what's going on. You see, this quote here is, for me, interesting. When people design these systems, they design systems more on what the system will do than necessarily thinking about what the client or the endpoint user in certain circumstances might need. So all of a sudden, because you've got a bit of kit that will do this, that and the other, it doesn't mean that this, that and the other are best suited to the challenge of, for example, skill acquisition or skill refinement for an elite performer. So what I've decided to try and do here is to take three examples, three common applications, I think, of performance analysis methods, and say, let's just think about some of the qualifiers. Doesn't mean I don't think it's a useful tool. I think it's great. I like performance analysts. They can marry my daughter anytime, please. It's not a problem. But what I'm facing is that actually there are some qualifications to its use that makes it a useful tool and not a Swiss Army knife. And the reason why? Because some people commit to this tool, say, I've spent this money on it, and it's absolutely great, therefore I'll use it for everything. And that doesn't work. So, for example, what might we have got from technology in the application, for example, of skill acquisition that might be bad? And here's a quick list. And when you start looking at the skill acquisition literature and you look at when people might need what they might need, you start going, actually, these are things that start to follow from the misapplication under certain circumstances of performance analysis data. That's not to say it's the performance analyst's fault. It may well be the coach's fault. It might well be the psychologist or whatever, but there are some problems. So what might we have got would be good? Well, of course, it depends. It depends on which way we want to go. My two friends here have a 50-50 chance of getting out or getting in the clag. So really, an idea of on what it might depend would be quite useful for the coach and for the guy who's using the data as to how it works through. So, for example, what outcome do you want? Now, broadly, in terms of Skill Act, and this is Skill Act 101, so my apologies if I know I've got people in here with PhDs and aspiring PhDs in it, so this is a gross oversimplification, but it'll do for the time being. You've got two sorts of you've got two outcomes that you can drive for. You can try and get people improving quickly, and you can, as opposed to, you can try and get people progressing more slowly, but at the end of the day, having better retention and transfer. And when you're working in a performance environment, it is surely this one that you want and not this one. This one's great. If you're a ski instructor and you want to get someone upright at the end of the week so they don't break their legs, they can ski and they can go home and pull in the disco on the last night and fly, that's fine. If all of a sudden now you're working with a guy on the sort of a 4-year or an 8-year cycle into an Olympics, that is exactly not what you're interested in. So all of a sudden we've got some challenges. An example, in the old days was a thing called the GLC, the Greater London Council, and it made a decision about swimming lessons. So what it said was, okay, we've got a group of primary schools and they all go swimming. So you guys always go on a Monday, on a Tuesday, on a Wednesday, on a Thursday, on a Friday for 10 weeks. And someone said, this is bloody silly. The coach drivers get lost, the kids forget their kit. Are we swimming today, sir? Whatever. Yeah, it doesn't work. So we'll send you guys for 2 weeks. Every day, still 10 sessions, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks, total recall. 2 weeks, whatever, anyway. But that's what we'll do, that's how it'll work. If you missed that, don't worry, it wasn't worth it. So as you work through, everybody got the same volume of training, everybody got 10 sessions, and lo and behold, everybody said, this is brilliant, because these guys progress so quickly. They learn to swim so much quicker than they used to under the old system. This blocked practice is a great idea. What a goodie. Until someone noticed 2 years later, hang on a minute, when they come back the next year, they've forgotten how to do it, the little blighters. Yeah? And actually, if the idea was to teach them to swim to actually stop them drowning, yeah, which this was in East London, so, you know, them drowning is no real challenge because it strengthens the gene pool, but you get my idea. You know, all of a sudden you'd like them to be able to swim. I'm from there, you know, it explains a lot. But so what they said was that actually this idea, this blocked practice idea, was great in terms of them improving quickly because look, they learnt so much per lesson, but they didn't. They learnt less per lesson, and that they didn't retain it. They couldn't transfer it. 2 years later, they're in trouble. I'm ignoring the fact he's clicking away and sticking a camera up my nose. Good luck to you. Yeah, I wish I'd shaved. Never mind. But so all of a sudden, we've got all sorts of issues. So my point is that this sort of principle applies across a whole variety of different ways of coaching. The ways in which we schedule practice, how much knowledge of results we give, in that less knowledge of results seems to account for this better retention transfer, the terms of demonstrations we use, so do we show someone who's an expert and then ask them to pick that up, or do we show them a warts and all model? In other words, as we work, there are a number of different ways in which we can use the data that we get, depending on what sort of outcome we want. And that's the point. There's a qualification to the use of the data, which involves some thought, which I don't necessarily think is actually universally applied. So, in summary, if you want rapid learning, if you want to see a rapid change, and that might be very sensible in a performance environment. If he's got to do a certain job next Saturday, I want quick change, I'm going to use quick change methods with him. If I'm trying to develop him over a longer period of time, over an Olympic cycle or more, then I'm not going to use those techniques. And therefore, if you're going to get a well-qualified analyst, the analyst is going to come in and say, now here's the data, but be careful, it comes with a government health warning about how it's used. Just because I can present expert data, contrasts, you know, all angles, etc., 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 does not necessarily make it good. It means what I need to think about what I want to use the data for. So for better learning, I'm actually making my learner work harder. Yeah? The slower progress can frustrate, but so does racing, so does competing, so does doing anything, yeah? But also, if I now start trying to present information in a way that means that these guys learn quickly, very often these guys feel good about themselves, whereas these guys who are receiving the information in the way that's best for them get frustrated. This is one of the classic sort of studies when postcodes came into the UK and they tried to teach all the guys who work for the post office to type, and very quickly, they asked the guys from Cambridge in the Applied Psych unit, of course they ran a study on it, and these guys who were taught by the blocked method learnt quicker than these guys who were taught by the distributed method, even though these guys showed twice as much improvement per lesson than these guys did. Except that everybody on this group, the distributed practice, went, sod this, we're fed up with these guys taking a rise out of us, we want to use their method. All of a sudden, that's what everybody did, even though it was less effective for the end point. Does this make sense, ladies and gents? What I'm saying is that there's a way of making decisions about how our data are used. Okay, let's go into now how we might actually use this information. What do performers need? Is there almost like a lesson 101 that I need to give to athletes so that they can make best use of the performance data? Well, they need the ability to attend to the right things, or I need to be able to draw their attention to the right things. So when we brought performance analysis into curling, which is a very, very strange sport in which men show they can sweep, yeah, all of a sudden we had a situation where we had to try and make sure that the players were looking at the right things and not using that excellent performance analysis data that was presented to them to look at good shots all the time or look at shit shots all the time. That's a technical term from curling, sorry. All right, so they need the ability to look at the right things. And they also need, of course, the ability to interpret and understand the information in the right way. In other words, if I'm the analyst and I'm going to present the data to them, a knowledge of what sorts of precursor skills I need in my learners, in my performers, is going to be useful to me to be able to work it. A good example? Let's have a look. Are you paying attention? He is.
Yes, yes, yes.
So be warned, pay attention. So all of a sudden now we're saying, okay, if I'm now going to try and get my performers to benefit maximally from the feedback, then I'm actually going to make sure that they have a certain set of skills. And of course the coach has a certain set of skills before I actually start pumping the good stuff across to them. As an example, and again, this is a very quick flash as Mac trip through this. There's a lot of stuff in here, but hopefully we're all there, and seeing as it's after lunch, you haven't dropped off yet. If you do, I'll come and smack your bum, don't worry. So what we're looking at is what modality would we use? Because traditionally, at least, the performance analysis feedback is very visual. Is that fair? Yeah, that's the predominant sort of modality. And all of a sudden, you start recognizing that that modality is not necessarily the most useful. It's certainly one that is most common. But what you start to look at is the extent to which multisensory feedback, sensory feedback that makes use of the utility and the application of other modalities is very, very useful. So rather than give people visual feedback, you actually recognize how important movement rhythm and movement pace is. And for example, quite literally, you turn the volume up on a piece of film, and that all of a sudden starts having all sorts of positive effects. So in other words, what you'd like to do is not to just give people visual data, you'd like to give them visual with sound data. That sound data, for example, if you're filming at a game, gives them an emotional context. If you're filming a movement, gives them a rhythm context, and that rhythm is much, much better as a source of information for them to access and start to tweak the technique that they're developing. So once again, the presentation of information, even if it's presented at the right time and in the right sort of percentage, I'll talk about that in a minute, it's important to recognise that there are all sorts of benefits from presenting information in a variety of other different modalities. So for example, very good effects from getting guys to practice their pommel horse routine and then listen to a tape of the noises that their hand makes as a perfect cue. I used to work in motocross, and we would have a guy do his warm-up laps, and he's set for time laps with a little Walkman strapped to his helmet, which is very difficult to get on. But never mind, once it's there, all of a sudden we're picking up the sound, and it's a perfect cue for where he is on the track. Makes sense? So it's the perfect cue for us in terms of getting this guy to use simulation, as you were saying this morning, yeah, to be able to say, this is the way I want to set up. We could present visual information. It's much more sensible for us to present it through a different modality. The auditory system is so much more powerful at tweaking movement than the visual system for a whole variety of reasons, which we can go into later if you want, yeah, that it seems to me fairly silly that we don't make more use of auditory information. However, again, if I'm preaching to the converted, that's great. But if I'm not, the number of times that I would be saying to guys who were doing analysis of movement for us in a whole variety of sports, Give us the sound. Give me a realistic sense of the sound, because that's going to be a good deal more useful. And that's my point in here. Yeah, this will make a big difference. It will make more sense to the guy. It will make for better performance increments for the performer when she or he starts to use these sound ideas. Okay, we can grab attention, yeah, and therefore it's the timing of the information, the way in which the information it presents that starts to make sense. We actually overestimate the amount of feedback that athletes need. And I've already highlighted to you that lots of feedback presents this knowledge of results crutching. The athlete starts to rely on us. So how was that? Do it. How was that? Do it. How was that? If you're always telling me, I never need to review it internally, because I'm just going to look at you and go, how was that, coach? So trying to limit the amount of information, or presenting the information in ways that parameterizes or bandwidths the feedback that the athlete's getting, is again a good way of working. If we reduce it, if we delay it, if we limit it, it's better for this long-term learning, this idea of retention and transfer, which most of us in this room, most of the time, will be concerned with. That's why that "it depends" bit was important. Of course, there will be circumstances in here where, as analysts, you want to present information in a way that generates a very rapid change, or generates a very rapid development of self-confidence. So I'm not saying thou shalt do it this way or thou shalt do it that way. I'm just coming up with "it depends." That's why my company is called Grey Matters. Clearly because of the brain, clearly because of my ash blonde hairstyle, but most of the time because as a consultant, everybody wants a black and white answer, and there ain't one. It depends. And the art, as well as the expertise in being a effective performance scientist, is in deciding where that shades of grey, not 50 of them, nothing, no butt plugs here, but where in the sort of the fifth, that shades of grey, the answer comes, where it fits. Interestingly, the benefit of getting information, the benefit of getting feedback, is better when you get it when you ask for it. Or it's better when you get it in certain percentages. So for example, people tend to ask for feedback earlier in their attempts, and then start shaping it themselves. So if all of a sudden I'm working with an excellent feedback system that gives me the ability to watch my performance, that's actually something you might want to limit under certain circumstances, not all the time. Hopefully that point's coming across. The whole of this presentation, ladies and gents, is very much an "it depends" type thing. Okay, so if I go back to my earlier list, yeah, and don't worry, there won't be a short quiz next period. But if I go back to my earlier list, I can see that all of a sudden there are actually a number of things that would change under certain circumstances which might affect your role if part of your role is presenting information about how well the person's doing, if part of your role is presenting feedback or performance analysis data in terms of promoting learning or skill retention or skill refinement, where someone's learnt the thing and they want to actually tweak it. And knowing when it depends on what it does, yeah, is, I think, a little bit of the science that, in my experience, I'm sure for nobody in this room, but in my experience, has been a common problem with the use of performance analysis across the different fields of sport. Okay, so the last one. The nature of knowing, and I think we've had several presentations today that have touched on the use of performance analysis data coming out as being a way of me knowing that, a way of me knowing that all of a sudden my athlete is overtrained or is pretty cream crackered. A way of knowing that this style of decision making would be good. A way of knowing that actually this would be the most effective way in which to operate my armoured fighting vehicle. I'm interested as to whether they have to have 8 points in their licence before they can drive, but it seems like a good idea. All right, so in which case, now how do we work this? Well, again, psychology tells us a number of things about what's going on. That what tends to happen is that people, because of evolution, will look for quick answers. We like quick answers. We're built for quick answers. There's a lot of sense to that. If all of a sudden, you know, I go, oh, is that a Tyrannosaurus Rex? Let's have a chat. You know, I'm probably going to get killed and you've run away, so your genes maintain and my genes don't. Yeah? So all of a sudden, it's very evolutionarily sensible for me to make quick decisions. And that term of quick decision, called satisficing, coming up very quickly with the answer, the best answer that satisfies my situation at the minute, is a well-known, well-established, but potentially, I think, understood, but certainly under-applied concept in terms of the use of knowledge. Yeah? All of a sudden, generally, people like quick answers. And this satisficing issue, yeah, which has been around since the 50s, yeah, is actually a genuine problem. Let's just try a simple task. So wake the person up next to you gently. I'm going to give you a little maths problem. Yeah, because all of you guys are superb at maths, because that's what you do. I want you to write down the answer or get the answer in your head, and then I want you to raise your hand as quick as you possibly can. But be quick, because I'll be spotting whether the rugby players beat the footballers, yeah, etc., etc. So are you sitting comfortably? As soon as you know the answer, wham your hand up. Ready? Keep it up, put it up and keep it up. Come on, the rest of you, you slow bastards. Come on, where are you? Bloody Leicester Tigers are way behind as usual. Late to the breakdown at the start. Now keep your hand up. Go on, go on, go on. I've only got about 40% of people answering. Where are the rest of you? Take your fingers out your nose. Come on. All right, that's quite enough. What's the answer? What's the answer?
That costs £1 more than...
Yeah, what's the answer, you bullshitting bastard? Come on, what's the answer? What's the answer?
5 pence.
5 pence. Who had 5 pence? Who had 10 pence? Ah, right. This is part of a test. It's called it's a test basically that kicks into your willingness to actually make quick decisions. Yeah? Looking at you guys, you didn't make quick decisions. Yeah? You're a waste of bloody time. I'm not going for a curry with you because we'll be sitting in a curry house all night. But my point is that most people, or lots of people, will come up with a 10 pence answer to this. Of course, if it's 10 pence, then the total will be £1.20. Yeah? And you're very right that it's 5 pence. Now, because he's an analyst, he's said there, and he's been suspicious, and he's double-checked the answer, yeah? And then he's sort of got his calculator out, and then he's phoned a friend, and he's gone, you silly sod, you don't make me look silly. Anyway, my point is this. Lots of people will come up with a snap answer. If you're into the literature, in terms of the ways in which people make decisions, this is a system 1 answer. This is a quick, intuitive, yeah, let me make a snap decision. Do you think intuitive snap decision making is prized in sport? There's nothing scary. Yes. Yes, the answer is yes, it is. In spades. Indeed, we rate people who are fast and decisive and making these sorts of decisions. We like that. We're built like that. And that system kicks in, yeah, under other circumstances to make us even more likely to take these intuitive decisions. Yeah? You guys are displaying a tendency towards system 2, very analytic thinking. That's not surprising. It's your training. I'm putting in a situation where you're going, there's a trick here. Yeah, he's a dodgy git from Essex, of course there's a trick here. But you're looking for it. But otherwise, we like that. But the problem is, that as a result of that, we get problems like this because of this. So all of a sudden, we've got medics who are not very good at data-based probabilistic reasoning, and as a result, they make bad decisions. Now, if you, like me, have enjoyed House, though I can't see how Prince George from Blackadder got that part, but never mind, he did. But as of a sudden you've enjoyed that, you see a guy who just sort of routinely just tries out different treatments, half killing the bastard every sort of 10 minutes until they get the answer at the end. That's probably not necessarily a good way of treating, especially if you're dealing with private patients. So what we're talking about here is that because of people's inclination to use a reasoning system that is not necessarily functional and effective for that circumstance, we get these sorts of challenges. Whereas if we start going into system 2, the system that by your training, ladies and gentlemen, you would be inclined towards, and a careful analysis, a careful consideration, a weighing up of what's going on, we get a situation where even experts often prefer to go with the gut. So, interestingly, if you turn around and try and teach data-driven decision-making techniques, it does not necessarily result in those becoming common use. My interest here in that actually teaching people in financial circles how to make good data-driven decisions doesn't work. Yeah, I wish I'd known that about 4 or 5 years ago, because we might have actually been able to do something about it. But these are reasonably sort of serious sort of situations. And yet what we've got is that when all of a sudden we start giving people training, yeah, and in this circumstance, think managers, think coaches, even think performers, and we start saying to them, actually, look, here is a source of information, like Brett's, here is a nice simple heuristic, actually you want to make these decisions like this, then all of a sudden they tend to maybe not do that, or if it requires some sort of processing and consideration, not do it well enough so that they tend to go for quick answers. Yeah? Now, when we've worked with coaches, in my experience as the performance director of athletics, do you know how many England schools champions I've coached was a justification from my coaches for, you really should trust me. Yeah, I was extremely unpopular because, for example, I might go, look, you know, you're right, I don't know much about athletics, but your sprinters got slower for the last 4 years, and I seem to remember somewhere that you needed to get quicker. But maybe I don't understand the nuances of the sport, sarcastic bastard. Anyway, my point was that people turning around and going, in my experience, yeah, was a very common justification. And yet experience plays funny tricks. And especially when we're in the circumstance of going through this. And especially, ladies and gents, when there's a dearth of research about how you might most appropriately develop decision-making. Now, this is on-pitch decision-making, if we're talking about games players. It's off-pitch decision-making, if we're talking about coaches and other support staff. And, dare I suggest, oh, go on, dare, okay, dare I suggest performance analysts as well. Yeah? There's a dearth of research about us knowing how people are trained best to make decisions under fire, yeah, in pressured situations, or even in slower situations. So why might this occur? Well, it occurs for a couple of reasons. One is because we don't tend, as a habit, to audit thinking in slower time. I had the pleasure of going through military training, and one of the best pieces of advice I ever got, I asked my military colleagues to reflect on this, was when you get the chance, check it, audit it. How are we doing, boys? Am I right? Yeah. Now, if all of a sudden we're under fire, oh, do you think we should go? Do you think we should attack them that way or that way? Let's have a focus group. Is probably not the sort of habit that would inspire the confidence of the men. But most of the time, yeah, you would take the opportunity, even in the middle of an op, to go, let's just check. Are we actually working to pace? Because when you start to look at the work of Philip Tetlock, and this is a lifelong work looking at expert decision makers, and he says your expert decision makers in politics and financial situations are less than 15% accurate, you go, gosh, okay. And the people who are more than 15% accurate, he calls them foxes, as opposed to the hedgehogs who just roll themselves in a ball and go data, 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 this reinforces my position. They're capable of making adjustments on the fly. It's almost like they're constantly testing and adjusting their prediction against what's going on. Now that to me is good practice. But my point is, ladies and gents, you don't necessarily get coaches who do that. Yeah? We like people who are decisive. We like decisive decision makers, like this chap, yeah, who with his gut makes decisions. He clearly can't do emails, as he said, and clearly doesn't know how to complete a tax form, he says. Sorry. Okay, fair enough. But again, what we don't do as a tendency is do this. And it'd be interesting to go back and look at, you know, the amount of information that you get that shows that some people do this more than others. Yeah? Because I don't think we do that enough. And this telling quote here, which is our tendency to defend our position, to actually look at a situation and go, no, I'm right, look, yeah. Certainly my position when my missus challenges, where are you? Oh, well, I need to try and defend my position. But in actual fact, what we're looking at is a situation where we should quite often critically evaluate where we are. Nietzsche said, to argue with vigour and to disagree without rancour is the mark of the true mind. I would suggest that my experience of the difference between high-performance cultures, and everybody here works in a high-performance culture, and a high-performing culture, a culture that's going really well and pushing things through, one of the biggest markers is the quality and frequency of disagreement. The extent to which we can be working on the same support team and we can have a conversation that says, I'm not quite sure that's right, but you're in charge, you take it, that's okay, as opposed to me going, oh yes, that's lovely, I love your talent transfer system, I love your whatever system it is, yeah, sorry, bit of a Freudian bitch there, but never mind. But you know, that's the way in which it works, as opposed to questioning, because that for me is the essence of the focus on performance, no compromise, etc., essence, but I don't think we get it, ladies and gentlemen, in many British performance environments. So, in summary, what have I got? I think that performance analysis is an absolute belter of a tool. Yeah? I don't, however, think it's a Swiss Army knife. I don't think it can be used the same way in every circumstance. You're probably sitting here thinking, was that worth half an hour of my life? Yeah? But if you hear the point, that's fine. All I'm saying is to be careful to audit the ways in which your data are used, the ways in which you present your data, and also the way in which you educate people how to use the data you present, because that way you will make the best of the tool. If you overuse it, and Lord knows lots of consultants like to overuse, then we're in trouble. I had the pleasure, just in closing, of working on the summer camp of a major international team sport in Britain. There were 48 different consultants presenting to that sport. Each one of those 48 trying to present his or her answer as being essential to what's going on. There aren't that many answers. There can't be that many answers. That's crap. Yeah? And so someone somewhere has got to be choosy. And were you to think of the number of times that British teams have toured with a number of specialists to support them, which has led to the players getting absolutely, brain dead because they've got 14 different experts during the day having their half hour with them, you start to see that we need to be a little bit choosy and we need to be a little bit more aware as to how the things that we do need to be used sparingly, appropriately, effectively. Hopefully I'll get out alive. Thank you for your attention. Over to you.